So we'll get started. Thank you. So we have wonderful panelists here. I'm going to have them introduce themselves, and then we'll get started on the topics that pertain to enterprises.
My name is Chris Hodge. I'm the interoperability engineer for the OpenStack Foundation. So I work on things like the OpenStack Powered program and APIs and interoperability.
I'm Jesse Proudman. I'm an IBM Distinguished Engineer and CTO of the IBM Blue Box product. I was the founder of a company called Blue Box that was acquired by IBM just over a year ago.
I'm Randy Bias. I was one of the founders of the OpenStack movement, and one of the nice things I've been called is an iconoclast. And some of the nice things have been, or not nice things I've been called, I can't tell you.
Hey, I'm Avi Nayak with Pure Storage. I'm on the product team and very intimidated to be here with such luminaries.
Vijay Chabolu, I run the cloud practice at Red Hat Consulting.
Thank you. And I already have my microphone, thanks. So I am one of the co-moderator. I'll be moderating with Sri. Al Hilwa with IDC. I'm an industry analyst covering developer research. And I'll be asking a lot of the developer questions, the platform questions, from the perspective of what developers want to do with OpenStack.
So the way we'll do is we'll kind of alternate the questions. I will focus more on the infrastructure, as Al mentioned. Thank you, Al. So maybe it's a softball for you, Randy. Is OpenStack production ready?
Many OpenStack powered products are production ready, but it's like you're getting a box of Legos if you go get OpenStack by itself, and I'm not trying to pitch any particular product. You go buy it from whoever you want, but putting it together yourself is foolish. I've seen this movie a bunch of times now, and I've seen the implosions, and it's never been pretty. And the reality is that in OpenStack Silicon Valley last year, maybe the year before, I did a presentation. I asked people, I said, who thinks setting up SDN is easy? 400 people. I got no takers. I said, who thinks setting up SDS is easy? I got no takers. How about compute? No takers. And I said, then why the hell do the marketing teams in OpenStack land tell you they're going to give you an easy combination of the three? Right? I mean, when you put this stuff together, it gets harder, not easier, right? Building a private cloud is a very difficult undertaking, and doing it on your own when you're also trying to change the culture inside your business and adopt DevOps and move to cloud-native applications and increase the speed of delivery, I mean, it's crazy talk. You really need to start taking, variability out of the equation, and one of the best ways to do that is go get a very bulletproof production-grade version of OpenStack. And I'd be happy to give you my unfiltered view of whose is production-grade without giving, I wouldn't even pitch my company. I'll make that deal with you, but offline.
No, I think to maybe speak to a little bit about what Randy was talking about is, I ran an OpenStack cloud years ago, and I did build it by hand, and it served hundreds of users, and it was an undertaking. It was a difficult undertaking, but when you compare 2011, 2012 to 2016, and you look at the tooling that is available for you today that automates this. Depending on the scale that you're looking at, I think it's much easier today to stand up an OpenStack cloud that is production ready for environments of a particular size than it was back then, and the tooling is only going to get better.
There's no doubt it's gotten better, but let's not confuse OpenStack maturing with the general problem of trying to build a private cloud. I am one of the very few people who is a founding member of OpenStack who has deep expertise building networks, network backbones, doing Unix and Linux automation at scale, building large-scale storage systems, putting it all together like hands-on, log into the router and switch, running BGP, running OSPF, architecting the network. And I'm telling you that building a private cloud, regardless of whether you use OpenStack or VMware or anything else, is a non-trivial exercise. OpenStack does not make it easier. It gives you tools that you didn't have before, which is fantastic, and the maturity of those tools is increasing. That's fantastic. But there is no easy button. There will never be an easy button for private cloud, or there would be hundreds of Amazon Web Services competitors right now that would basically be crushing it in the marketplace, and we haven't seen that.
Thanks, Randy. I think we have a lot more questions to debate about. So Yeah, so the format is like, we'll start with one of the panelists, but all the panelists are requested to share their perspectives. So please pass on the mics once you're done with your, yeah. So I'm going to get one more so that I can be on.
You'll never do
so.
that.
So I actually agree with both of you guys. I think that is OpenStack production ready is more a question of, are you ready to deploy OpenStack in production? Do you have the processes in place? Do you understand what your expectations are? Set the benchmark for success and then see if you can attain those benchmarks. And I agree with Randy when he says that it's building a private cloud is not simple, but it's the same with most other big projects. Take SAP, for example, right? There are millions of ways to screw up an SAP implementation, and similarly, there are millions of ways to screw up a private cloud implementation. Do you have the right people? Do you have the right processes? Do you have the right sponsorship? And do you have the right goals in mind?
Thanks, Obi.
I mean, it's been 6 years, and we ask this question at every conference every year for 6 years. There is an easy button. It's our product, and we've got hundreds. Yeah, that is the easy button. Get somebody that knows what they're doing to do it for you as a service. It's why you go to public cloud, because running a public cloud's hard, so you go do the same thing with private clouds through a provider like us. But the reality is, at the end of the day, you got to have the skill sets. And if you have those skill sets internally and you know what you're doing, then yeah, it's production ready. And if you don't, it'll be an unmitigated disaster.
Well, yeah, and this is exactly why you go to a vendor to build your private cloud for you. Is you are externalizing that expertise, and hopefully you're doing it in a stable way, because no matter how that company changes internally, that they've set up processes and procedures to make sure that they have the expertise on hand to always solve it. Where if you're a business trying to do a cloud internally, in some ways it can be more volatile if your staff decides to take their skills and go. And that's been siloed in some way, but in the same way too, the tooling is getting better. If you look at the tooling for it, it's trying to abstract away a lot of that knowledge, and there's never going to be an easy button, but it's getting easier.
No, there is an easy button. Like, that's our product. But look, it's like climbing Everest, right? Like you can go climb Everest on your own, and you're going to fumble around and stumble and probably die. You can buy nicer gear, and it'll make it a little easier, so you get better tools. You can hire a guide, and they'll take you up, or you can sponsor somebody, and they'll climb the mountain while you sit at home and watch. And you just got to decide what the spectrum that you're willing to risk is.
You just equated building OpenStack to climbing Mount Everest.
Yeah, no problem.
Vijay?
So I guess the question is not about is OpenStack easy to deploy, right? I guess we're all debating whether OpenStack is easy to install or not. Is it production ready? Just look around. How many people are actually using OpenStack in environments, right? We started off 5 years ago, when you could probably count by your hand how many people actually had OpenStack in production, running workloads. You go today, it's at hundreds and thousands. So there is a lot more adoption of OpenStack. There's a lot more people comfortable in running OpenStack in production. There is enough mass of people picking up the technologies and skills to actually make it easier to run in your enterprises. So I'd probably say OpenStack is ready for production, but it's still not easy to deploy.
Thank you. And just to be clear, the button is not built on Amazon, so it's
Okay.
not an IoT button. So, Al?
Yeah, so I was just going to take this in a little bit of a different direction. Asking from a developer perspective, so I had this question, why should developers care, right? Because this is an infrastructure product. But then I wanted to sort of just shift the question a little bit. Why should developers care, but also what kind of developer might care? And perhaps, we're now into this 5-6 years, what developers are doing with OpenStack in particular in terms of building their apps. Is it doing the agility, is it fulfilling its agility role that it's supposed to, the cloud services are supposed to do? I was looking at the OpenStack survey, and a large number of people using OpenStack, 75% were in the ICT sector. It was like vendors and hardware makers and telecoms and so on. So it hasn't quite penetrated quite as much into run-of-the-mill, everyday end-user organizations. Is that still ahead for OpenStack? Is it about developers? Maybe it's not. And Randy, I wanted to sort of start with you, but you can, again, pass it around. Yeah.
I don't think I don't think developers should care about OpenStack. In fact, I think it's bad if they care about OpenStack. you know, the things that Amazon and, you know, things like Docker unlocked was making it very easy for developers just, you know, scratch an itch to go try a new initiative and get it done. And that's really how we unlock the value of the application developers within the enterprise, is make it very, very easy for them to start and very low risk for them to go and get an application up and running. And right now, Amazon does that very well. Containers do it semi-well, but then OpenStack, you know, doesn't do it as well as it could if it's not a managed service from Jesse. If it's more you're doing your own deployment, then you wind up in the infrastructure land of like setting the whole thing up, and then, you know, getting people, you know, sort of used to the APIs, and then the APIs don't look like anything else, and then you run into the problem where, you know, one OpenStack deployment's not interoperable with the other. You know, Chris is working on that, but it's still, you know, there's still largely snowflakes. And so I will point you back to what I said earlier, which is that you tend to be better off going with an established vendor who's got, you know, production grade version of OpenStack, and you know, you can, you know, every one of your deployments will look the same. I mean, it won't look like any other vendor's OpenStack deployments, but at least it'll be close. And you know, developers want this stuff to be like electricity or the water tap, right? They turn on what they need and they use it and they turn it off. And anything that's in the way of that is a problem. Learning APIs, coming up to speed on Chef and Puppet, you know, all that stuff is a stumbling block. And so it's our job, it's incumbent upon us to remove those stumbling blocks as quickly as possible so they can go as fast as possible.
I mean, I think the interesting thing that's happened over the course of the last 6 years with OpenStack, particularly around API adoption, and I agree, I don't think developers should care, but OpenStack has done a very good job at making sure that it has become sort of the de facto private cloud set of technologies that are supported in the broadest set of other tools. So if you think about configuration management tools, Chef, Puppet, Ansible, Salt, all support the OpenStack APIs. You think about a bunch of the Docker tool set today, many of them support the OpenStack APIs. Terraform supports the OpenStack APIs. Cloud management platforms all support the OpenStack APIs. So we've sort of won that battle where 3 or 4 years ago, if somebody said, great, I've got an application and now I want to go deploy it on OpenStack, step one might be, hey, I actually got to go learn this API on my own and write my own integration against it. Like, that's a huge hurdle. We don't have that anymore. You can take the tools that you're using for any other provider and generally use them.
Yeah, but if one provider has a different storage backend that doesn't have the same feature set, and that feature is not supported in the API, and you were dependent on it, or if one vendor doesn't have Murano or Heat where the other does, then you have problems, right? So it's still very difficult to draw a line around OpenStack. So you can learn the APIs, but your app that you developed on a particular OpenStack is still somewhat hostage to that OpenStack deployment.
Yeah, I mean, that's the same if you go to any different public cloud provider. They all have different things. You just got to pick the tool set. But
Just guys, let's give all the panelists a chance before you go second time. So thank you.
So one of the things that we've seen come out of the OpenStack infrastructure community is libraries to handle the differences between multiple clouds, and so what does a developer need to know? If you're a developer who's writing a cloud library, then you need to understand the OpenStack APIs directly. But if you are a developer who is using multi-cloud, then the tool that you are going to go look at is Shade, and you're going to look at things like OpenStack Ansible that are built on top of Shade. And it's the layers of abstraction that are important. And the further up the stack you climb, the less you need to know about it. So do developers need to know about OpenStack? It depends. What kind of developer are you? But the tooling is there. Like, you know, Shade has been a tremendous success, and we're using it in you know, people who have barely touched OpenStack. We're using it in hackathons all over the world now to stand up applications and run.
About the hackathon, but good that you mentioned. So.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Well, so one of the things that the OpenStack Foundation has been doing lately is going to events like these around the world and setting up, you know, essentially one-day event, 24 hours, you know, where teams of developers come together and build applications to run on top of OpenStack. So we provide them with the cloud, we provide them with, you know, space to work and support from various members of the community, and we've seen a lot of really exciting things come out of this, and you know, and in part it's you know building on these abstraction layers is part of what's made it so successful.
Vijay, Avinash, you guys have anything to add to this?
No, I'll actually add to what Jesse was saying about, right? If you're a developer, all you have to be looking at is writing code. What the code does behind, if it's actually supposed to spin up instances, if it's supposed to go and make a message to somewhere else, that's all part of what you're coding on, right? So if you actually have to work with the underlying hardware, you have to work on the underlying environment, they need to know those APIs. But if you don't, then you just use the abstraction that's already made available to you. Like whether you use Ansible, Puppet, Chef, any of those tools, they all have integrations with OpenStack, right? So you do not need to know that. So.
Okay.
I agree. So if it really depends on what you're developing, right? So what does the application that you're building require? Does it require you to basically understand the underlying infrastructure? Then yes, then you do need to understand how it's running on the infrastructure. If you don't, then the more abstracted it is, the better.
Yeah, I mean, I think the context for my question was, there's all these services. Amazon has hundreds and hundreds of services. Developers are like kids in a candy store over there. When you're trying to set that up in a private cloud setting, how do you really provide your developers that kind of capabilities, things like Lambdas and serverless, what have you, So that's kind of the idea is it's a kind of a tough order to do that by IT organizations. But of course, there's the lock-in, which is the other side, Sri, why don't you do another question?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And so containers, everybody is talking about that, so let's talk about containers. So Jesse, what do you think OpenStack is needed in the age of containers? Let me repeat the question maybe. Why do you think OpenStack is needed in the age of containers?
So containers, great set of technology, but containers by themselves, they require an infrastructure. And that infrastructure could be bare metal, could be virtual machines, but it has to exist. They also require a network. And so I think OpenStack is unique, provides a unique capability to have a contiguous domain between bare metal virtual machines and those containers that are running on them in a contiguous network domain, all under a contiguous authentication blanket. And that's not something that you get just by running containers natively somewhere else. So I think, to me, containers don't create the death of OpenStack. They are a supplement to what we're doing already with OpenStack. Certainly now, you can run containers without OpenStack. It's not a requirement to have this type of technology, but I think the ecosystem has been and continue to be supportive of the container ecosystem, and we can move together as sort of a pair.
So like I said, containers need both compute, storage, and network, and that's what OpenStack gives you. The focus of containers should be probably on application portability, moving across different clouds, moving across different environments, and the focus of OpenStack is to provide that cloud platform, right? So whether you're running containers on anywhere, right, OpenStack actually has the ability to provide you everything that you need for running containers. It just kind of add a little more complexity to the networking part of it because of how it is, but over the time, that'll just evolve, right? Right now, there are actually two different networking paradigms between containers and the underlying OpenStack environment. That'll probably just come together at some point, and that'll actually mean that containers can coexist with OpenStack. And we're actually seeing more and more customers I'm from Red Hat, so I'll probably pitch the OpenShift container platform. We actually seen a lot more customers deploying the container platform on OpenStack so that it actually gives them the ability to actually make the adoption of containers in their environments a lot easier.
So good that you mentioned, but in those deployments, is OpenStack like optional, or can I have another virtualization environment? What is the value that OpenStack adds in that setup?
So just look at the way if you're actually running applications, right? What percent of applications are containerized today? Probably 1 or 2%. You still have applications that need to run on VMs or bare metal. So if you need to actually have an application that actually is a combination of all of those technologies, what is the best place to run it? OpenStack, right? It actually gives you bare metal, VMs, and the ability to run containers, right? You actually can put that all together, and in a multi-tenant environment, using multi-tenants, it gives you the isolation you need.
Thank you.
Yeah, to echo what he said, right? I think OpenStack is the only framework which allows you to run VMs and containers, unlike Kubernetes, which is like almost entirely container-based. So if you want one underlying infrastructure platform to run your VM, what you currently have, you may want to migrate to containers, you may not. But if you're running a heterogeneous environment with VMs and containers, OpenStack seems to be the platform for that.
And if I don't have any VMs?
Choice is yours. So from my perspective, horses for courses, right? Kubernetes has advantages, OpenStack has advantages. Which advantage is more important to you?
Yeah, if you don't have any VMs, OpenStack provides you a way to manage your hardware infrastructure inside of OpenStack using all of the APIs and authentication systems. You can use the bare metal driver inside of Nova, and it doesn't you in some ways There are always going to be details that you have to worry about, but if that's the environment you're running in, then that's a great environment to be in.
No, I'll pass this time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so kind of related to all of this is we have all the talk about microservices, cloud-native applications, all the new DevOps processes. Maybe you can, again, help me understand how does OpenStack support these or support developers doing these in particular? Again, I mean, is it positioned? I know there's a lot of different vendors that have different perspectives on whether it's being positioned in the market, but is it being positioned for developers to do these kinds of things? Or is it about older applications? And I'm going to ask you about that a little bit later. But as far as new applications, where does OpenStack fit?
So the OpenStack itself and its APIs, I think, are well suited towards cloud-native applications. You look at a lot of the original architecture decisions that OpenStack made, they were focused towards the notion of infrastructure that can disappear. And that has been part of the OpenStack community for really the last 6 years. I think as you've looked at the vendors and ultimately the users who have become more involved in the technology, more and more of those users and more of those vendors have argued for OpenStack to be more accepting of traditional applications that require HAVM capabilities or other resiliency capabilities. And so over time, I think that desire has worked its way into portions of the code base. But from day zero, I think the intent was and has continued to be focused on cloud native.
So for those who don't know, OpenStack Nova started out as a clone of Amazon Web Services, and in fact started with the EC2 APIs, and then adopted the Rackspace APIs before it was launched. I've written about this a lot of times. So it was really designed to be a cattle-based system. However, to Jesse's point, there continues to be a lot of confusion as we talk to and engage with infrastructure teams about what they want, because they didn't understand the pets versus cow thing for a long time, still largely don't, and that's led to a lot of problems. However, one of the things you have to ask yourself is, why doesn't OpenStack have DRS and HA today? It's 6 years on. Well, the problem is there's competing concerns, right? You want it to be multi-hypervisor and support bare metal and containers, and you want DRS and HA? I got news for you. All the technology that you need to do DRS is specific to each one of those things. You've just created a very complex problem. VMware, by going vertically integrated, is able to do some very cool stuff. And I think it's a mistake to try to rebuild that stuff inside of OpenStack. What we should have done is embrace the fact that OpenStack is a new thing for a new world designed for these cattle-based workloads and cattle-based architecture, and we should have been exclusively focused on that instead of trying to bring in like a lot of the old baggage, which has just stalled us and slowed us down and made us kind of like a crappy version of VMware and a crappy version of Amazon and not like an awesome version of either one. Now, again, I'll say what I said before. Some people take an OpenStack and they build a product out of it where they do focus on one or the other, and they can get there by not trying to be all things to all people. But I'm talking about the general community and code base, not any products based off OpenStack, which can take it specific direction.